If you've used Google Search recently, you've likely encountered a new default experience. A synthesized, multi-paragraph answer sitting right at the top of the results page. Google calls them AI overviews. But this isn't just a new feature. It's a fundamental rewrite of how information flows online. For decades, search meant a ranked list of sources. You chose what to read. Now, a single system authors the answer. And with over 2 billion users encountering these summaries daily, the epistemic and economic stakes are enormous. But how does this system actually operate under the hood? The triggering logic is opaque. The source selection is undocumented. And the claim generation is largely a black box. To cut through the noise, researchers at Washington University in St. Louis ran a large-scale longitudinal measurement study. Over a 40-day window in 2026, they deployed a distributed crawler to issue 55,300 trending queries across 19 topical categories. They didn't just scrape the text. They built a full evaluation pipeline to measure activation patterns, source credibility, claim fidelity, and publisher economic exposure. And the results paint a picture of a system that is performing better than many critics claim, but worse than Google's own public characterizations suggest. Let's start with the methodology, because the engineering here is rigorous. They used a Puppeteer-based crawler deployed on AWS Lambda, configured with stateless browser profiles to eliminate session bias. To evade bot detection without triggering CAPTCHAs, they spoofed navigator flags, used a standard macOS Chrome user agent, and randomized inter-keystroke delays. When a query returned an AIO, the system didn't just capture the summary. It extracted the embedded reference citations, fetched the full text of every cited web page using readability LXML to strip boilerplate, and parsed the DOM to detect display ad inventory using easy list filter rules. For claim verification, they built a two-stage LLM-based pipeline. First, an extraction model decomposed each AIO into atomic, self-contained factual claims. They forced the model to split compound sentences, resolve pronouns to full entity names, and drop section headings. Then, a separate verification model checked each claim against the full body text of every cited reference. They used a continuous credibility metric called PC1, which is derived from the first principal component of multiple expert and crowd ratings of news domain credibility. This gave them a fine-grained, continuous score from 0 to 1 for over 11,000 domains. They also ran statistical tests with Bonferroni correction to ensure the differences they observed weren't just noise. Now to the findings. First, activation. Overall, AIOs appeared for 13.7% of queries. But that aggregate number hides a massive structural bias. Question form queries trigger AIOs at a rate of 64.7%, compared to just 9.5% for non-questions. That's a 6.8 times difference. And when you look at topical categories, politically sensitive topics see markedly suppressed rates. This isn't a bug. It's an undisclosed editorial trigger system that selectively gates AI generation based on query structure and topic sensitivity. Second, source selection. Google claims AIOs are grounded in top web results. The data confirms AIO-cited domains are systematically more credible than the organic first-page results. The mean PC1 score for AIO references was 0.732, compared to 0.645 for organic results. But here's the critical detail. 29.8% of the sources AIOs cite do not appear anywhere on the first page. Google's generative model is pulling from a completely different source pool than its ranking algorithm. They also found that AIOs suppress user-generated content significantly more than organic search does. Only 14% of AIO citations come from unvetted platforms like YouTube or Reddit, compared to 41% for organic results. This editorial filtering is exactly what drives the higher average credibility scores. Third, claim fidelity. This is where the system's limitations become clear. Across 7,500 verifiable AIOs, they extracted 98,020 atomic claims. 89% were consistent with their sources, but 11% were unsupported. When you break down the failure modes, omission dominates. About 7% of claims aren't mentioned in the cited sources at all. 2.7% are directly contradicted. And 1.4% show conflicting support across different sources. Crucially, source quality and claim fidelity are largely independent. Better sources don't automatically fix the generation layer. They also identified two categories that look terrible on paper: climate and jobs and education. But that was a pipeline artifact. Those categories are dominated by real-time queries, like weather forecasts and school closures. The AIOs were synthesizing live data from structured feeds at the moment of generation. By the time their crawler fetched the reference pages hours or days later, the values had shifted, causing the verifier to flag them as omitted or incorrect. When they filtered out those real-time subpopulations, fidelity across the board climbed into the 86 to 95% range. Fourth, the economic impact. More than half of the pages AIOs cite run display advertising. When Google synthesizes an answer, it intercepts the click. But Google's own sponsored search ads are still there. In over 2% of AIO-bearing pages, sponsored slots appear on the same result page, and in half of those cases, they appear above the AIO block. The economic burden is highly asymmetric. Publishers lose the organic click and the ad revenue that depends on it, while Google's ad inventory remains completely intact. And because the researcher's query sample was dominated by informational and trending topics rather than commercial intent searches, the real-world revenue displacement is likely even higher. So what does this mean for the future of the open web? AIOs represent a rapid, opaque transformation of search infrastructure. The grounding architecture does reduce blatant fabrication compared to closed-book chatbots, but it doesn't eliminate structural omission or misattribution. And the economic feedback loop is already forming. If publishers lose revenue, they invest less in original reporting and high-quality editorial content. That degrades the very sources AIOs rely on, which could eventually force the system to lean even harder on unvetted user-generated content, lowering fidelity further. The researchers are calling for audit-ready APIs, transparent triggering policies, and structured data-sharing agreements, so independent researchers can track system evolution in real time. Regulatory bodies in the EU, UK, and US are already scrutinizing these exact dynamics. As AI overviews become the default interface through which billions of people encounter information, we're not just measuring a search feature. We're measuring the structural integrity of the information ecosystem itself. And sustained, independent measurement is the only way to ensure it remains transparent, accountable, and sustainable.